Good afternoon and welcome to the March 2013 Smart Grid Educational Series webinar. I am Irfan Ibrahim, your moderator for this series. We have been having these monthly webinars since January of 2012, and we try to address issues that are pertinent to the electric sector from a technology, business process, and policy perspective, and we try to make this as open a forum as possible to bring in the various industry stakeholders into a meaningful dialogue on these critical issues. Today we have the privilege of listening to Nadya Bartol of the Utility Telecom Council, who's going to tell us a little bit about the supply chain security issues around the information and communication technologies that are relevant to smart grid. Now, this is an area that has not received a lot of attention until late. And the reason for that is that people were so busy trying to figure out smart grid requirements and then qualifying technologies and then implementing them, that this is an area that has not received the kind of focus that it needs to. So I'm really glad that Nadya is going to be presenting on this topic, because if you begin to think about all the different companies that are out there that are making products, hardware and software, and providing services that are held by so many different holding companies, some local to the United States, some in North America, and some international, that we really need to get a handle on where each piece of hardware and software is coming from, and to make sure that the companies that are involved in making them are meeting certain requirements from a cybersecurity perspective as well as from a physical security perspective. So there's a whole area around supply chain security that needs to be visited. There needs to be standards established and then implemented, and then there has to be the oversight. So the Utility Telecom Council for many years has represented the interests of utilities as it pertains to communications, and to look for the appropriate legislation in state and federal organizations in order to enable the best possible communications within the administrative aspect of utilities as well as the power system side. So having an organization like that in the electric sector is a huge asset, and Nadya, with her experience in cybersecurity and supply chain issues for several years, is a very good authority to talk to us about this subject. So at this point, I would like to welcome Nadya to this webinar, and I'm going to pass the presenter ball to her, and she can start her presentation. So Nadya?
Thank you, Irfan, for the wonderful introduction, and I am delighted to be here presenting to this group, and I'd like to thank Irfan for the opportunity to do so. While the ball is being passed to me, just a couple of things about this presentation. It's a long presentation. In the back of it are more detailed slides about various standards and best practices I will be addressing rather briefly. And I will not go through every single slide in detail. I wanted to provide this level of information for subsequent review and just better information for the participants and a greater level of knowledge to provide. Okay, and that's how I advance. There we go. Quite simple, high-level agenda. I'd like to talk a little bit about what is this when we say ICT supply chain security, or ICT supply chain risk management, or cyber supply chain risk management. What do we really mean? I have some examples both from the utility space, from the energy space, and from a broader information technology space. And then there's a large segment of the briefing that talks to existing and emerging practices, and this is various standards, guidelines, and other documents put out by the industry for the industry that can be tailored to the smart grid environment. And finally, we'll conclude, and I will be delighted to entertain your questions. So what is this thing? What do we call ICT supply chain risk management? ICT supply chain security, and all of these words. And as you're noticing, the problem hasn't received a single title. We're still, even in the community working this problem, we're still normalizing around what we're going to call it. In my personal opinion, it doesn't matter what the specific word is as long as we know what it's for. And it really is to address the problem that the ICT, information communication technology, is assembled throughout very extended and deep and broad supply chains, more like supply chain networks, where the organization acquiring the device or the services or the software or the hardware doesn't necessarily know where the rest of the components for the stuff they're acquiring come from. And so throughout these long extended networked chains, there's lots of opportunity for sloppy practices upstream to result in vulnerable devices and not very good services that create further vulnerabilities for the acquirer, for the ultimate customer, or even for the integrator in the middle of the chain. There's also plenty of opportunity to sneak in what I refer to as extra features, unintended features. The thing that you got does something in addition to what you ordered, and that's not something you wanted to do. For example, maybe it's sending your data to a third party that you don't want to receive the data. There is, up until recently, there wasn't any content that talked to kind of uniform set of practices. There wasn't any material that talked to how organizations, how acquiring organizations, and even vendors who integrate their products from multiple sources could achieve some sort of transparency into what is upstream in the supply chain being done in terms of securing these products. The lexicon is still gelling, and it is a hard problem. We're still working it. But there are solutions emerging that are now being used, both best practices by individual companies, industry consortia, and national and international standards. The picture on slide 5 is a very it's an old picture. It's from 2005. It provides DoD view, and it's from a DoD think tank report. It's very well used in the ICT supply chain risk management space. There are now different versions of this picture, and here's the picture. So I'd like to ask you to ignore the words where it says foreign, because it's not really about where it's developed and who develops it, but it's about how trustworthy those developers are, regardless of their location or origin. The yellow oval in the left upper corner is really denoting the fact that very frequently the acquiring organization, which in this picture is called program office because it's DoD speak, and the supplying organization, which is called the prime contractor because it is DoD speak, that's the relationship that the acquirer sees. They say, you know, you shall do these security controls, you shall do these security things, your people will be certified, cleared, background checked, or whatever. But there's not a lot, again, up until recently, that was asked for. And when you integrate these systems or these services or these devices for me, this is what you should be asking. This is what you should know about how your suppliers address security or security of the supply chain in these squigglies, in this octopus kind of an arrangement back there. And it goes into places where we don't always know where it goes. Maybe it was developed in the Joe garage shop, and Joe is really good, and he creates robust code. Maybe it was done willy-nilly, and the code is vulnerable just because it was done willy-nilly. Or maybe Joe did put something in. Or maybe Joe wants to make some money, and he took some chips out of access routers, and then he washed them in a river, and then he put them back into the brand new routers, and then your routers will fail because ahead of time because they're not quite working the way they're supposed to. It's the lack of knowledge that creates this risk. It's the fact that people don't know the risk they're assuming and therefore can't manage it. The table you're seeing right now was inspired by Thomas Friedman's book, The World is Flat, and there's 3 pages there, somewhere in the middle, where he describes the benefits of supply chaining and talks about him tracing the origins of his own Dell laptop throughout multiple countries in the world. The point of this slide is there are so many flags in this here that they're hard to count. And again, we don't know where it is because so many occasions it says, well, maybe it came from South Korea, maybe it came from Taiwan, maybe it came from Germany. And again, the point is not where it came from, but that not everybody can trace it this way. and maybe not everybody knows how well things were done and what happened in the point of transfer and delivery. Again, what's the possibility that that malicious intent was there to insert something unintended? Another slide talks to the national origins of components used in PCs, and again, you see all kinds of countries and places. So the point of this slide is actually, if you tell me that we should just be buying American, it really doesn't work, at least in the general IT technology. The skill set is distributed all over the world, the capabilities are, and it's impossible to buy American-only PCs, as you probably all know. So saying foreign is bad doesn't work in this context, and the community, the ICT supply chain community working this for, at this point, over 10 years, has worked hard to kind of comprehend this and figure out that the solution needs to be about practices and it needs to be global. So obviously this is a Smart Grid Educational Series seminar, and you may ask me, what does this have to do with Smart Grid? Your examples are from the PC world. And admittedly so, I don't have examples of where components come from in the Smart Grid world yet, but Smart Grid consists of ICT products. These products are purchased by acquirers from suppliers. They're the folks buying these products, and they're the folks selling these products. These products have supply chains of their own. These suppliers integrate the products. And so my question is always, how many of those acquirers have asked their suppliers real questions, not only about the supplier's security practices, but something about security practices exercised by the sub-suppliers of these suppliers. If you're assembling a device, do you know where your components come from, and what are the security requirements you are asking your vendors to provide to ensure that that device, when it's assembled, is trustworthy? And that really is the question here. And I think the answer is we really don't know what risk we're taking on, and we need to manage that risk so that we understand it. Before we go into any more detail, I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference of this thing I'm talking about from what we know as traditional supply chain risk management. And especially when I started working this problem, there was a lot of confusion about how is it different from when I want to get my physical product to the point of destination on time, when I'm moving a physical good, when I need to protect the supply chain in case there's a disaster, whether it's an earthquake or a war. I want to be sure that my stuff gets to me or my stuff gets to my consumer in a predictable fashion. And so I need to manage the risk to the supply chain from various contingencies, and again, make sure that the product is there on time and the alternate delivery routes are in place and nothing is jeopardized. Well, we're not talking about the risk to the supply chain. We're talking about the risk from the supply chain. The ICT piece of the problem really is about my product, physical or logical, hardware or software, getting to me the way I wanted it and the way it was shipped. I want my product to have all of the features I said it should. I don't want to have any unintended stuff in there, no extra features. I want to know if there's somebody there inserting those extra features, and I want to figure out how to get them out of there. And it's really about the risk from the supply chain of ICT that has impacts for business and mission for years to come. How do I mitigate that? So the key difference is whether what we're talking about today is about the risk from the supply chain to the mission, to the operation, to the business, through the fact that the ICT was assembled throughout the extended supply chain. There is 3 types of risks that we'll look at, and later in the description of the specific standards and methods, you will see that not all of these are addressed. And this is really about counterfeit and taint. So counterfeit electronics is quite simple. It's when your device and the pieces of your device don't come from where you think they come. They were made by somebody else, and then they slapped the label on it and the stamp of the legitimate manufacturer. And then there's some consequences from that. Taint comes in 2 ways. Somebody may intentionally be inserting malicious code or malicious components into your device. The code may execute itself 20 years later and do something really bad, like explode the device, or it may just start sending data back to where you really don't want it to go. Unintentional taint, poor practices upstream, which is the third bullet, is about, if it's in Joe's garage shop or a big company that's sloppy, the code is not good, the hardware may have defects or vulnerabilities that make it more easily penetratable later. The next three slides kind of show pictures of this and build on each other. So I'm starting with intentional insertions of malicious functionality, and you see that this is a depiction of a network of suppliers, several layers, several kinds, and they all eventually converge into the provider integrator that puts together that product and sends it to the ultimate customer. And there's various not so good things that may be happening intentionally or unintentionally. The left side of the slide is upstream, so upstream in the supply chain. What it results in is those extra features where the backdoor lets somebody else come into your network, so if you're a provider, or into your network when you're a customer, and then the virus may execute and do bad things in both cases. If you look at the counterfeit electronics within the same supply chain, as components get inserted, you may get extra features because they'll do something you didn't ask, or if it's just very frequently for financial gain, it's just not a good quality component, so it may result in a product failure way ahead of the planned time. So for the provider, it is bad for their bottom line. If it's on warranty, it's also bad for their reputation, because if too many products fail ahead of time, they may lose their customers. For the customer, obviously, it's bad because if something fails, you have to replace it, and your business may be impacted or your operations. And finally, poor practices upstream, such as poor coding practices or just poor quality, results in poor performance of the product. And again, it's bad for the provider when the product doesn't perform up to specification in the customer space, and it's bad for the customer because they rely on this for their operations. And so if we put all of them together, there's all kinds of things happening in the supply chain resulting in really impact to operations, reliability, safety, whatever else impacts the operations of the organization, confidentiality, financial bottom line. That's not good, which is why we need to manage these risks and try to avoid or reduce the chance of these red flags happening on the left side of the slide so that we don't have the red stars. A little bit of history, how did this all happen? The timeline really starts in 1999, where the first report by the Defense Science Board came out talking about the risk to DoD systems from foreign software components. Again, at that point, it had somewhat over an intelligence tinge to it, which disappeared as the time went along and more practices were developed and more realizations happened really in the minds of the folks working the problem. Then there were various reports in Europe and in the US. There were various government-led efforts. 2010, Stuxnet is a great case study on multiple things. One of those things that it's a case study on, and I do have a detailed slide on that a little later, is that this was the first known case of supply chain compromise, because for what we know from the press, foreign intelligence agencies embedded a malicious code on a vendor product that then got inserted into the operational space, and then which impacted the ability of the enterprise to deliver the services it was supposed to deliver. It impacted the centrifuges in this case. Most recently, in September, October 2012, and then early this year, there was a variety of reports, hacks, vulnerabilities revealed. The most recently in the United States, the executive order makes references to supply chain, as well as Mandiant's report does that as well. And National Defense Authorization Act of 2013 requires government contractors, the software that is installed in government systems, to be subject to robust testing because of these concerns. As the community was developing these practices, and it was quite an intense process starting in about 2006, what we realized is that ICT supply chain risk management wasn't an organizational function, it wasn't an organizational vertical, it was a grouping of practices that heavily relied on practices already existing within the organization. And the petals on this flower have one petal that says other disciplines, which is basically ... So in addition to the ones on the slide, quality plays a huge part. Project management plays a huge part. how organization acquires its acquisition practices plays a huge part. And while there is a core of activities that are purely ICT supply chain risk management, in order to make progress in this particular adventure engagement, the organizations really need to have these other things already in place that are working, like information security, software assurance, and supply chain practices. And a lot of good can be accomplished just by doing these things in the petals at a mature level. The practices that I'll be talking about a little later mostly focus on ICT supply chain risk management practices, and then they reference the surrounding activities that need to happen in order for this to actually work. And it is difficult because it requires experts from all of these disciplines to work together using their different vocabularies and kind of learn that everybody has their frameworks, but they intersect and overlap, and they need to work together to make this happen, solve the problem. Some examples, these are very, very dense slides. I'll go through them at a high level. They're for you to review later. There are links to articles. So really quickly, the first is an example of what happens when this is done for financial gain. An employee of American Superconductor working in Austria, was charged with stealing and modifying valuable software that controls wind turbines. The employee gave the software to Sinoval Wind Corporation, which was under contract with American Superconductor. Then Sinoval passed that to their affiliate, who was a competitor of American Superconductor. And then the competitor repackaged and sold it back to Sinoval at a very low cost. The impact was to American, their stock has gone down, and they had really bad corporate outcome from this because of the financial circumstances. There were various mitigations. The person was charged. There was a court case filed. But again, you know, somebody who wanted to make some money sold it, went to the competition, and bad things happened. DoD is not immune. U.S. government is not immune. Other governments are not immune. These cases exist all over the world. So it really doesn't give us, this is a case when a company was supplying suspect components. They were eventually pulled, but it really doesn't give us good sense of security when we know that these things may be in U.S. defense supply chain and weapon systems, and what if missiles misfire, right? That's not a good thing. Stuxnet, we talked about a bit. Telvent, which is now has been purchased recently by Schneider Electric. In this case, hackers accessed an internal network of Telvent. They got access to project files for their SCADA system, which is broadly used in energy, oil and gas industries in North America and in some water systems. And the fact that the hackers got access to the project files means that they can later get into customer systems and penetrate those, understanding things about the software itself that they wouldn't understand otherwise. Now, Telvent, I actually heard a Telvent security executive speak about this. They disconnected the systems. They issued a patch. They did a bunch of things that helped mitigate the problem. But nevertheless, this is a good example. They handled it well, but this is a good example of bad things that can happen through your vendor supply chain. The last example is on a runtime vulnerability that exists in a piece of software that runs on lots of ICSs. And the problem there is that, again, it's in your software library. You don't know that it's there. You may not even know your product is using that library. But then, again, bad things can happen and your network can be subverted because if it's not patched. So moving on, there is a whole bunch of standards. This is going to be a lot of content. I will try to hit the high points of it. But again, feel free to read the slides after the fact, and I'm certainly available for later questions even after we finish the webinar. I'd be glad to answer those or point you in the right direction. As far as the timeline, between 2008 and 2013, lots of things have been published. Most of them are publicly available. Some of them are standards that need to be purchased. But a lot of this content is out there. Some of it has been done by the U.S. government. Some of it has been done by the industry within the United States and globally. And each of these things has one or two slides in the subsequent presentation, but there's a lot out there. The first item I want to highlight is NIST Interagency Report 7622 with a long title, Notional Supply Chain Risk Management Practices for Federal Information Systems. NIST Interagency Report is a research type document. It provides interesting information for people to look at, review, chew on, test out. It's not a requirements document in any shape and form. And this document took a long time to develop. It took 4 years, 3 public drafts, and lots of reviews with various public-private partnerships in IT and communication sectors. The document targets federal agencies. The agencies were asking for the document. They wanted something that they could use as a source of content for requirements, but with a careful consideration of whether those fit their purposes in their environment. In this document, there's 3 roles in the supply chain. Acquirer, which is in that context, is a federal agency acquiring the product or service. Integrator, which in that early slide with an orange bubble and squigglies after it, is that prime contractor integrator. Sometimes it's called provider in different contexts. And that's the organization that integrates the solution and sometimes customizes it. And then supplier, which is basically a COTS provider. This is Microsoft, Cisco, et cetera, of the world, Oracles, et cetera, et cetera. And again, it can be used as a source of requirements and best practices, but only after careful analysis of how applicable it is and how realistic it is to ask these questions from various parties in the supply chain, such as integrators and suppliers. NIST is currently working on a special publication on the same subject, which is going to be more robust and tried out. It is based on the NIST controls catalog, or it's compatible with the NIST controls catalog, and a variety of other documents, and the number is NIST Special Publication 800-161. That document is also focused on the federal agencies acquiring ICT. The second document I'd like to highlight is an ISO standard, ISO IEC 27036. Various dashes in the title denote where in the ISO structure the standard is developed. So it's in the group that develops IT security standards. And the title of the standard is Information Security for Supplier Relationships. What's interesting about this standard is that it applies globally. Therefore, it's very high level. What does globally mean? ISO, IEC, and ITU standards are written into international agreements. So these have to apply in the United States, in Malaysia, in Australia, in China, in Africa, South America, everywhere. In order to apply in the variety of legislative and regulatory environments and technical environments, this particular document is technology neutral. It has to be high level. It contains what's but not how's. This standard speaks to 2 types of stakeholders, acquirer and supplier, so that integrator and supplier from the NIST document have been merged into one, essentially. But integrators sometimes are acquirers too. So one of the challenges with this whole field is that it's highly recursive, and this standard addresses that as well. This standard is applicable to all types of organizations, whether it's government or industry, academia, nonprofit. And it was envisioned as a glue connector standard. In other words, if you recall that slide with a flower, it speaks to the middle of the flower, and it references various other standards that live in the petals, such as system and software engineering, information security, supply chain, and a little bit of others. The standard is a multi-part standard. Basically, that means that there's currently 4 volumes in it, and there may be more volumes as the time goes by, as specific cases of information security for supplier relationships are discovered. And it really focuses on how do I, as an organization, secure my relationship with the supplier or the acquirer in terms of how the information that gets passed, sensitive information, is protected. And this particular standard addresses both acquirer view and supplier view, because in this exchange of goods and services, there may be a concern on the part of the supplier. protection of intellectual property, their data, especially if the networks are connected, et cetera, et cetera. Part 1 here is very high level. It's about the statement of the problem. It holds the common definitions among all parts, and it summarizes the content of the parts. And it's short too. Part 2 is high-level requirements, and this is a shell statement, so this can be used either wholesale as a, I'd like my supplier to be compliant with the standard, or it can again be used as a source of requirements, kind of like a smorgasbord. I like 2 of these and 5 of these, and a little bit of configuration management and some requirement seasoning, but no risk management or something. That wasn't a good example, but I think I made my point. The requirements, part 2, addresses 2 scenarios. One of its clauses talks to how to set up an organizational capability to manage multiple security and multiple supplier relationships. So let's say I'm a large company, I have thousands or tens of thousands of suppliers. Is there a supplier registry? Is there some sort of categorization of suppliers so that I ask for better security, for more robust security requirements from the suppliers who are more critical to my business than from the ones who not necessarily aren't easily replaceable? How do I manage the risks? What are these security requirements, et cetera, et cetera? There's also another clause that talks to how to set up an individual supplier relationship from inception to termination. And that's a life cycle, and it's kind of phased. And it provides a mapping for those 2 parts. It's structured along the outline of standards in the system and software engineering, the life cycle processes. It also gives you a view from the ISO security controls. So it allows practitioners from both fields to come in with some familiarity of the content and kind of see what's added. Going back to the subject of specifically ICT supply chain security, that's in part 3. And part 3 is a guideline standard. It has no shall statements, but nothing prevents you from taking those shall statements, those should statements, and making them into shall statements if you want. It specifically addresses ICT, and it takes on the part about building an organizational capability and expands it into how do I handle it when it's hardware, software, and ICT IT services. And finally, part 4 builds similarly on part 3 and addresses specifically guidelines for security of cloud services, because cloud service is an example of ICT type acquisition. You're buying something that's based on IT technology, it's a service, and certainly there can be extra features in both on the underlying infrastructure and in what you get as a service that you didn't ask for and that may be bad for your mission, for your business. Parts 1 through 3 are now draft international standard. In ISO-E's, it means that they actually can be, I believe they can be purchased already. They will change with some minor tweaks. They're still undergoing change, but they're completely technically sound and finished. There's some minor glad to happies and, you know, grammar checks going on. Part 4 was recently started. It's not ready for prime time yet. You will not be able to find it anywhere unless you're a member of the organizations working this standard nationally or internationally. And it probably will be a couple of years until that document is available. Last thing I want to say is that the standard is supported by multiple countries, both acquiring countries and supplying countries. So it's a very diverse group of folks from US to Malaysia, Luxembourg, Sweden, China, Korea, and UK, and I'm missing somebody. But it's quite a robust group of people and countries and organizations supporting the development of this standard. The next item in the list is Common Criteria Supply Chain Technical Document. Common criteria is basically a product evaluation schema that is signed on by a number of countries who recognize each other's testing performed so that, you know, if you get your device tested in one country, let's say in Germany, US will recognize it up to a certain level of assurance. And common criteria, you may or may not know, is undergoing a change right now. But nevertheless, there is an activity going on to develop this document that provides specific supply chain related requirements that are currently not addressed in common criteria to support future testing and development. The document is scoped to address the threat of counterfeit products and components, so that's counterfeit, and threats based on taint. So this is the counterfeit and taint that we talked about earlier today. And it basically serves as a source of requirements for the folks writing a device-specific protection profile. Right now, the document is finished. It's been through the governing board of the Common Criteria Development Board, and there is an activity going on to pilot the document with several vendors and accreditation labs, certification labs, to work out the kinks and then see how it can be finalized and turned over to the Common Criteria folks. So that was product certification. The next one, the Open Group Trusted Technology Provider Standard, OTTPS, is more of a process activity that is done by one of the Open Group's forums, Trusted Technology Provider Forum. The purpose of this project is to create a standard in the certification schema for COTS products. Lots of, again, household names participating in this work. The Open Group wants to finish this and then fast track it into ISO, and there has been discussion that might result in adding this document to the 27036 ISO standard as Part 5. This document focuses on the provider, and that's a third bullet on the slide, and that provider is a midstream vendor developing products and managing the supply chain to provide acquirers and integrators with trustworthy products. So from the point of view of me as an acquirer, that's my supplier. But from the point of view of this organization, if they are like Microsoft or Cisco, they assemble stuff. And so they need to push those requirements upstream to their suppliers to be sure that they assemble it, they get trustworthy components, they assemble a trustworthy product, and they're able to deliver the trustworthy product to their ultimate customer. It has two series of requirements: technology development, mostly for the provider, and supply chain activities, mostly for the provider to get robust stuff from the third parties. As I said, they're working on, the standard is finished, the draft is finished, they're working on a conformance pilot and launching their accreditation program, also working on figuring out where and how they want to fast track this into ISO. Switching to IEC, there's actually a standard, again, in the works and draft that's focused on requirements for suppliers for control systems, which gets a little closer to the smart grid space. It's developed by something called IEC TC65 Working Group 10 in collaboration with a Dutch committee called WIB is a Dutch acronym, and that's International Instrumentation Users Association, and ISA committee. It's currently a technically sound document. That's what committee draft means, that it's technically sound, but there is still a lot of editorial and minor technical refinement work going on. It has two major parts: a maturity model that kind of walks you through the commonly accepted practices, and then a very detailed matrix of requirements that has baseline requirements and two levels of enhanced requirements. It is shall statements. It's very, very detailed down to the level of specific password configurations. And this standard talks only to I, the acquirer, will ask my suppliers to address these requirements and demonstrate to me that they're performing them and that I can monitor them doing so. So unlike the ISO standard that talks to, as an acquirer, I'm going to do these things, and the supplier, I'm going to do these things, this one only addresses one way from the acquirer to the supplier. Another set of, and IEC, so IEC standard is not available yet for common consumption because it's a CD. IEC works to the same schedule type arrangement as ISO. Therefore, once that standard becomes a draft international standard, it should be available for purchase, and at that point it will be just editorial changes that will be being done to it. Software Assurance Forum for Excellence in Code is an industry consortium. These documents are available. You can download them if you Google SAFECode, and you can find them on their website. And they focus on software assurance with security, authenticity, and integrity as its properties. And so software supply chain is presented as a software integrity issue. They have two documents. These documents are great. They're short, 20-page documents written in mostly plain English. So in order to see how these things can be done for software, you can read these, and it's not technobabble. It's really easy to read and understand. It's not as easy to implement. These are based on practices from major software houses such as Microsoft, Adobe, Oracle, Cisco, and a number of others. From our world, from the industrial control world, I believe Siemens is a member. But these are really good documents that summarize what needs to be done, and conceptually they're great. I guess I'm a fan. I keep talking about that. There's a document available on the DHS website. It was done in 2009. It's detailed contractual language for control system security, so back to ICS. Has a number of things in the document, and it's currently under revision for some basically technical updates. Has anything from what the language is to various factory acceptance test measures and site acceptance test measures, references, dependencies, how to maintain it. So it's quite detailed and quite good. I believe this is next to last. SAE is a large standard organization in the aerospace. And SAE used to stand for something, but they've disposed of the words, and now they're known as SAE. They have a whole series of standards on counterfeit electronics. They will tell you themselves that these are focused on the physical supply chain for counterfeit electronics on hardware. They're not focused on software. But there's a whole series. They're listed here. Again, if you go to sae.org, you will find about these documents, their status, when they're published, and what's happening with them. One of the folks does an excellent presentation by himself. By the way, I should have mentioned early on, and you're probably seeing all of the sourcing in the right bottom corner, this is very much a community activity where folks like myself will present and share the slides done by others over the years. We have almost like a common library of things that we talk about, all of us. And it's a really great way to develop content and concepts and take it out to the industry and starting to implement it, which a lot of these are being implemented, that we don't have to recreate the wheel as individual organizations and practitioners. We share this content, and that's a really, really good thing. I believe this is the last one, something called Information Security Forum, which is a large, again, international consortia based in London, is developing a framework that is supposed to pull some of this stuff together. ISF members are primarily financial services and large consultancies. They have some utilities, some energy companies, and some large technology organizations as well. They'd like to create a framework for identifying specific processes, activities, and mitigations that facilitate good security and supply relationships, and make it into a self-assessment framework that can be used for conformance and certification. That effort is still in draft. I have not checked in a couple of months as to what is going on. It uses the ISO standard as a top layer framework, and then their goal is to develop more detailed practices or find and connect that can help organizations understand how to implement this and then how to assess it. That concludes my presentation. Just a couple of brief points. There is a lot of content already here that can be repurposed for smart grid. Some of the content is high level, that it just needs to be made more detailed. Some of it is a little detailed, so it needs to be repurposed. But there's a lot of tailoring that can be done to give the smart grid community a starting point, if there isn't one already, to get a handle on what are the risks in the supply chain that we really need to address and figure out how bad they are, and maybe they're not bad, or if they're bad, how we can mitigate them to a certain extent. Going back to the pedal slide, the organization seeking this content may already have partial solutions, but they're not going to be in the traditional cybersecurity verticals, or maybe in the traditional other verticals. There will be tidbits of practices and different pieces that will need to be threaded through the organization. So it's going to be a little interesting where they will come from, and this data may have never been assembled this way and thought of as relevant with each other before, but it now is. And finally, there's lots and lots of formalization through international standards and certification efforts. So in a couple of years, there will be ways to certify processes, organizations, and products that should be easily portable, again, to the energy and smart grid environment. Now, I believe I'm done. I believe it's exactly 45 minutes. I'm not sure how I've done this, but Arfan, back to you for questions.
Thank you, Nadya. Do you have a slide that has your contact information?
You know what?
And post it.
I am not sure.
Let's go back to the front of the presentation. You might, I remember your name.
I don't believe it's at the front. You know, that's one thing I didn't do.
Okay, not a problem. We will, you can provide it in the version that we send out.
I would be delighted to do that. Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah, no problem. Now, as the people online will ask questions, let me start the set of questions. One of the challenges with supply chain is that there's an issue of time frame. Unlike real infrastructure where you can do situational awareness, you can put tools, you can do correlations because things are happening in real time. With supply chain, you can be weeks, months, even years in that supply chain from the start to finish. So the question I have for you is, what would be the equivalent of creating situational awareness in supply chain matters for security?
That's a great question. The way I think about this is that we really have two different scenarios to deal with. One is the installed base, where the train is gone. The devices are there. The services are being delivered. The software is being downloaded. And that would be addressed by the regular situational awareness as in cybersecurity. However, there is some material out there about the fact that once you trace the causes of an incident or a cause of vulnerability, and it may be supply chain, there is some sharing that needs to happen with the vendor or with the integrator so that they can put it back into their new release and try to reduce the risk of that happening again. To manage the future acquisitions, the best thing to do is to integrate these requirements or statements into your acquisition documents and then monitor. So once you have the contractual agreement to do these security-related things, you have to have a structure to monitor whether the vendor's security claims are really true, and that becomes your situational awareness. But that is really difficult to do for existing contracts and existing equipment. So for existing, if you find something, then collaborate with your suppliers to make sure they know and they can avoid it the next time. And for new, make this a part of your agreement and then monitor, and that's your situational awareness.
Okay, the next question has to do with the complexity that utilities face in issues like this, where there are so many standards that are out there. You've described several of them. Some of them are not standards, but just guidelines like the ones from NISTIR. Then you showed some standards of ISO, IEC, and others. How does a utility with limited number of people working in this area keep track of all of this and avoid the pitfalls, the cracks in between these standards? What would you recommend as a best practice on this?
That's a great question, too. Well, the good news is that most of these have a common DNA. The ISO standard and the NIST standard are there's a lot of the same people participating in all these groups. So some of it is different views into the same problem. And what you asked is precisely why ISF is trying to create this overarching framework. It really depends on what they want to use this for. If it's implementation, I would start with ISO or NIST because they're high level and all-encompassing. But then for individual cases, such as if you want to address software, the SAFECode documents are good for awareness. If you want to address COTS, the open group document is very good. It really depends on the context. and the industry documents will evolve faster than ISO standards. That's another consideration. But just like any other cybersecurity content, there isn't really, we have an overabundance of documents in this space. That's just the fact of life.
I think that one area where you can really provide a wonderful service to the industry is to develop some workflow diagrams that you can share, either through the NIST Cybersecurity Working Group or through the ISO IEC, that provides very simple diagrams that show the process by which you could do whitelisting of applications, by which you could, figure out what parts of which standards need to be looked at, but in a logical format that helps utility folks in this business, with their limited staff, be able to jump through the hoops. Because what I'm seeing missing is a narrative. The verbs are there, the nouns are there, the adjectives are there, but the composition is missing.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you.
So if you could provide some visuals like that that we could use in the industry, I think that would be a very valuable contribution.
I think some of this may be in existence, but I didn't think of including it. But I think what you're saying is a little more detailed than what I have to date, and it's certainly something that can be done. Definitely.
Yeah, I'm thinking of a combination of a decision tree model with a workflow diagram that shows a process by which, if the answer is yes, you do this. If the answer is no, you move to this. And it's a phased thing that utilities could use as a model. And then there could be replication of that and consistency, because one of the things that I'm very concerned about is that munis and co-ops that have relatively limited budgets but still have to meet the scrutiny of this may not have that capability unless these easy-to-use tools are available to them.
Well, let me actually, I have something to address that almost immediately. Going back to the petal diagram, the practices that are specific to supply chain rest on the foundation of good information security, good project management, and good acquisition practices. That is not supply chain. That is out there, again, in a multitude of standards. But if you don't have robust processes by which you manage projects, and if you haven't done a risk assessment and you don't have a good set of security controls that you're happy with, there's no reason, there's no sense to look at specific supply chain practices because they won't work. So at a very simplistic level, get your information security and project management and acquisition house in order. And then I can do the workflow. But especially for co-ops and munis, the basic stuff needs to be in place. The basic set of security questions for themselves and for their vendors, and that would be wonderful.
Yes.
But point taken, point absolutely taken that more content needs to happen to now explain how all of these parts fit together. How does this puzzle work now, and who is it for?
So I think this is a good opportunity for you to talk a little bit about the workshop that you're thinking of putting together as part of the CITER Energy Academy that we can offer to utilities.
Certainly. Thank you for that reminder. So as some of the participants I'm sure know, Irfan runs the CITER Academy with various classes and instructors, and we've discussed putting together a course, a workshop on ICT supply chain risk management. That would include much more robust discussion of all of these documents and obviously how they fit together. And some of the early lessons learned from government and industry on implementing these practices and what was found. It's just a thought. We're discussing it, but I think it would be a very useful course that would give people a robust idea of how to go back to their organization and what questions to ask and what practices to start putting in place to start managing this challenge.
Great. So to those who are online, I just wanted to share some observations with the large number of people in the utility industry that are on the verge of retirement, some estimates say as much as 19%, if only their 401k plans would allow them to retire, they would. And then by the year 2020, we're talking about 62% of our workforce retiring. And then combine that with all the new smart grid technologies that are coming in, with all the ICT upgrades that are occurring, the traditional mentor-mentee model will not work. So it needs to be infusion of large amounts of information through educational programs to the utilities, as well as the integrators and the product vendors, because they all work in a common ecosystem. So that's a big part of the motivation for this Cyber Energy Academy, so that utilities and integrators will work more productively with each other. My concern is in matters that are as subtle as supply chain, if the utility folks are not up to speed on the issues of cybersecurity and supply chain, then outsourcing by itself will not do the job, because you have to have a certain amount of in-house expertise in this area in order to engage the integrator in a proper manner. So this academy and these courses that we're talking about that Nadya mentioned also, it helps bridge those gaps. And so potentially the audience could be utilities, integrators, as well as product vendors sitting on-site in the utility at these workshops dealing with these issues, so that the standards, the best practices, and the technologies are understood in a very applied and practical way, so that it can help the infrastructure of the utility and the day-to-day operations. Now we have some questions from the audience, and I'd like to get to those. The first one is from Frederick Sheldon, who says, is there a repository of case studies for supply chain compromises that can help organizations focus on particularly prevalent threat models?
That's a great question. I want to say that it's not so far addressed in any of these documents, although there have been discussions to do so. The briefing that you have has 5 of those. There's others, and there's a bunch of folks in the community assembling the cases. To my knowledge, there isn't a formal repository, but if you run across another briefing in this space, you may find more cases, and they may look suspiciously the same way. Some of us use the same format. And you may notice that my slides are attributed to DoD and Brazil and Hamilton, some of those cases, because we stumbled upon this format early on and decided it was effective. But I don't know of a formal repository case studies yet.
All right. And then we have Mike Ainsworth from Venafi, who writes, thanks for the very interesting presentation. And Mike Ainsworth is from Venafi, which is an encryption management vendor. And he says that from the information risk management and encryption domain, that's his expertise. In the software world, the notion of supply chain management is often managed through digital signatures and corresponding certificates with valid trust chains. However, this is ineffective if organizations do not proactively manage their trust instruments, i.e. Stuxnet, Flame, use signed payload to appear as trusted to security software. He says, I'm interested in your thoughts and comments regarding if software certificate/trust store management should be considered as part of the scope of supply chain management. This may be answered by the SAFECode doc you referenced.
Absolutely. This is a technique that can be used to address some of the concerns. Code signing, I think, is addressed in the SAFECode document. Code tagging is a methodology that's currently being developed by an industry consortium. So absolutely, this is something that can help. But again, if you're not, as you're pointing out yourself, you're not managing this capability, it's not going to help then.
All right. And then Robert Abercrombie asks, shouldn't what we have been discussing been written into the procurement?
Yes, but very carefully, because if you write it without considering there's, I think, three considerations I can think of from the top of my head. One is think about what you really need and what your context is and which of these essentially bulleted statements from all these documents can be used. The second one, going back to the maturity of practices, if you only ask for the data and evidence that you can understand, absorb, and protect, because no sane vendor will give you their proprietary data if you cannot assure them that you will protect it like your firstborn. And if you are not going to be able to use this data, don't ask for it. And maybe that was just two things that I wanted to say.
All right. The next question from Frederick Sheldon. Frederick, by the way, is from Oak Ridge National Lab. He says, is there a supply chain risk assessment / security best practices maturity model / process that can help organizations know where they stand?
I don't believe so. University of Maryland did some research a couple of years ago and a year ago where they looked at various practices against a system life cycle and a supply chain life cycle. And I don't believe they discovered something that's there. So there may be individual approaches developed by various consultancies. I would actually expect consultancies to be developing approaches for these assessments, but not in the community space.
Okay.
And if somebody knows of it, please let me know.
Next question is, an approach from the procurements could be similar to what the DoD did with performance-based contracts.
It could. The National Defense Authorization Act does a similar thing for software testing. You could certainly include these things in your SLA. The most important thing is knowledge of what to ask in the particular context and knowledge of how to interpret the answers and then test and monitor.
Okay, and then Hanan Habbi asked, what do you think about the most significant key factors that affect ICT risk management using Iraqi business?
Well, any business should be able to demonstrate, to give the acquirer assurance that they are using robust processes resulting in trustworthy products and services. When I first got engaged in the development of the ISO standard, I discovered, so the history of the ISO standard was that the United States brought it to the committee, and it took us a year of a study period to demonstrate the need. When we first brought it in, what we got in response was, well, this is an interesting problem. Let's study it, but we're not sure what this all means, but it sounds like it's serious. A year later, we had a bunch of countries supporting it, and I think I talked about this a bit, maybe I didn't. The countries were both from the acquirer countries and the supplier countries, where on some of the earlier slides we had mostly Far East countries that supply components, and Malaysia was in the room very early on. I am convinced because they realized that they're supplying these components, and it would be of a competitive advantage to the country at a national level to have robust practices conforming to an international standard. So any organization in any country ought to be able to demonstrate that they're indeed implementing these practices, and therefore their devices, goods, services, software, hardware are robust and trustworthy. So that I think that applies Iraqi or Malaysia or U.S. or French business equally.
All right. William Miller asked, the Internet of Things will establish ISO 29161 as a new standard for identification of things. To work in JTC 1 SC31 and M2M, I guess that means machine to machine, / IoT, are establishing ISO IEC IEEE P21451-1-4 as a common transport protocol for the cargo shipping industry and has been introduced for use for process control systems, including smart grid. Please comment of use of QR codes and how they can be used for legacy devices. This could be easily adopted today.
That was a lot of numbers and acronyms.
Yes, it is. But have you heard of any of these numbers?
I've heard of the Internet of Things Committee. I understand the nomenclature of SC31. IT security techniques is SC27 under JTC1. And based on the description, I am sure there is a relationship there. The ISO IEC 27036 is at the process level, and it makes a certain, it takes it into consideration that there's lots of technical standards that can be useful. It doesn't reference them all. But I would, from what I heard just now from Irfan reading it, I am sure that this standard can be used in a suite of different techniques to ensure that the product, the thing, is what it purports to be, and it hasn't been modified, and it probably can be adapted for that purpose. However, I would encourage the people to first set up their capabilities so that they know to ask that question, and then they know how to interpret the information that they get. Okay.
Now, I have a question. How do you bridge the gap between TC57 and TC65 and the two cybersecurity-related body of standards that they're both creating that have touch points with smart grid? How do we bring them together, and how do utilities make sense of these two often diverging schools of thought?
Great question. Great question. I can only answer from how we try to do this in SC27, so I'm going to give you a short case study. And this is a strictly personal opinion, standards experts are great, and they always want to develop new standards. And the way the human dynamic works is that a group gets into a groove on, this is our framework, this is our methodology, and this is how we're going to do this. What we try to do with SC27 is make sure we don't recreate the content and we work through a system of liaisons with other groups. So in ISO and IEC world, the TCs and SCs are focused on specific subjects, and they have national body members, so US, Japan, the countries. And sometimes they have liaison members who can either be industry associations or they can be other technical committees or subcommittees, which is what TC and SC stands for. And in SC27, and especially for 27036, we went into extraordinary measures to identify groups that at the time of the initiation of the standard had content that was relevant, and we established liaison relationships with those groups. Some are quite active, some are not nearly active. For example, the liaison with Subcommittee 7, SC7, which is Systems Software Engineering, is active enough that they've looked at our documents, and we've looked at theirs. The liaison with the committee that handles the supply chain standards, and that's, I believe, TC 6 or 8 under ISO, they have reviewed, they said, you've referenced our document incorrectly, here's how you should reference it. We said, thank you very much, that's great. And they haven't exhibited a lot of interest. Fortunately or unfortunately, in this case, it all depends on the individual experts within committees who are or are not conditioned to carrying information back and forth. So it's up to the individual people. So translating this, and this is why 27036 has so many references to other standards, but attempts not to repeat the content. TC65 and TC57, somebody, an individual or a company, is going to need to take on the mission of becoming a liaison and slowly but surely help these people see what the similarities and differences are and where the demarcations are. And it's not an easy process, and it doesn't work very well for the users because it's confusing and voluminous. But it's a human organization problem. I guess one more thing I can say about this, at the process level standards, ISO, the bigger ISO, the overarching ISO, has initiated a project to make all management systems compatible. So that's an example of a top-down in a standards body effort to say, well, you have all of these quality, information security, supply chain, IT service management, what am I missing? Environmental management, industrial control systems management, but that's IEC. There's lots of management system standards. They all roughly talk to the same thing, only they use specific lingo from a discipline. So they said, well, make them all along the same outline so that organizations don't have to do these things 15 different ways.
Because the challenge that I see in the industry is that when you have all these competing standards, and I call them competing because they're competing for human resources.
Yeah.
They're one person who's scattered over 2 or 3 committees and has very limited time. The problem that occurs is there may be overlaps and there may be gaps. And the sophisticated hacker or the person with nefarious intentions is up to speed on where the gaps are. And while they may be compliant with various standards, the person with the nefarious intention may be able to exploit the gaps that exist in the standards or the processes. So that is what my concern is. That but you seem to be addressing a little bit of that in this overarching thing that you're doing through the ISO.
Well, it's not only the nefarious person can take advantage of that, but utilities don't have, or any other user group, have the resources to read them all and save what's relevant. One thing I do want to say for the user organization, nothing replaces, at least in cybersecurity and cyber supply chain, doing that risk assessment and saying this is what I need, and using all of this available content as a smorgasbord for these fit me and these don't. Now, there are software tools out there that will give you all of these different standards and will map them to each other so that you know whose control set maps to whose control set and where the gaps are. That costs, but it removes a lot of guesswork and reading out of your efforts. But again, standards are there to be applied to a problem, and unless you define what the problem is per that risk assessment, you don't know if the standards are doing its job for you.
That's correct. Yes, so the analogy here is that you're trying to create a stone wall, and all these standards are stones of different sizes. You still have to decide how to put them together to make it look like a stone wall.
Yes.
Okay, very good. So I think that we have read all the questions we have here. Oh, we have one more. There's one of my colleagues who was asking, when will you be posting the presentation URLs again, Irfan? Okay, so that will happen as soon as Nadya gives me an updated PDF version of this presentation with her name and email address, and I will put it up for those of you who have registered online today, and that should happen within a day or two. So that answers that question. What I want to do is we still have a few minutes, so I want to wrap it up by thanking Nadya for a wonderful, very informative presentation and addressing all the questions. It's really good to have a subject matter expert who's so focused on this topic, who can provide us information that at least gets the ball rolling for the utilities, the integrators, the product vendors who've been on the call and who are going to reflect on this rather complex subject, because it's a many-body problem. It involves many people, many institutions, many times across the globe. But the common underlying platform of IP-based technologies can get all kinds of malware and nefarious activities from point A to point B without much effort. And so that's why you have to be extra vigilant to go through the entire supply chain and make sure that, as Nadya said, you do a proper risk assessment and make sure that the appropriate controls are in place in each phase to mitigate the risks that are associated with that phase. So thank you so much, Nadya. Do you have any concluding comments?
Yes, I want to thank you for the opportunity, and I want to comment on what you just said. Don't go to the entire supply chain. It actually is really difficult and really expensive. But understand what's in there and understand the risk. So work through several layers as much as you need or as much as feasible, and then understand that there's uncertainties there. And try to do the best for your operations and your needs. getting to the very end of it, as one of the folks in this community says, do you want me to go, actually more than one, do you want me to go back to silicon? What do you really mean? So I'm going to leave you with the thought that it's all about risk management.
Yes. And as I was mentioning about the workforce becoming leaner and the profit margins becoming narrower and centralized power being given away to distributed energy resources with very little reserve spin, we don't have much of a window of opportunity for slacking off in this area. We have to be very, very careful. So because we're walking a tightrope, just trying to keep the carbon in check and also trying to remain competitive. Now what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing on March 27th, which is our next seminar at IBM Innovation Center in Foster City, California. Jeff St. John from Green Tech Media will be presenting, and he will be sharing some of the findings of the Network Grid event that will occur next week in Westlake Village in Southern California, and he will be talking about some of the research findings of Green Tech Media in Smart Grid. So I'm looking forward to an exciting seminar, and I hope that if you're in the Bay Area, you can be present in person, and if you're not, then you can be online. That will be at 6 p.m. on Wednesday, March 27th, Pacific time. So with that, I thank you all. I'm now going to end the webcast recording, and if you have registered, you will receive the links for the webcast recording and the presentation. Have a good afternoon. Thank you, Nadya, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.